Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Medal of Honor Frontline for Xbox, GameCube, and PlayStation 2, and it was later re-released on PlayStation Network. What you're seeing here is the GameCube version. This is a first-person shooter developed by EA Los Angeles and published by EA in May of 2002 for PlayStation 2, and it followed up later on in the year for Xbox and GameCube, and it saw a re-release on PlayStation Network in 2010. It was the first game in the Medal of Honor series to be released in that particular generation of consoles, and it actually ended up being one of the better received titles in the series, at least if you go by the reviews of the day. And despite my primary gaming platform being PC, I did actually play this back in the day. So it's not so much a question of does the game still hold up after all these years, it's more of a question of did what I have to say about it back then mirror what I'm saying about it now? Because a lot can change with hindsight. You can have a much more enlightened perspective on what the zeitgeist of the time was, you can have a much more enlightened perspective on what game design is really supposed to be rather than what we thought it was back then. Thing is that hindsight doesn't really matter in this particular case, because what I had to say about it back in the early 2000s is exactly the same thing as I'm saying about it now. So let's go ahead and delve into this thing and find out what exactly we're dealing with here. Well, as far as presentation goes, this was at the fairly early bits of the whole brown and gray and realistic craze. So while it does have a bit of color, it's so minimal that it really doesn't matter. The only real colors you're going to see in this thing are brown, gray, and green, and it just looks ugly. And on top of the art style problems, there's just the issues with the actual visual quality. Sure, you can say, oh well, it was one of the fairly early games for PS2. Obviously it's not going to look all that great because they hadn't figured everything out yet. Well, to some degree, but you have to keep in mind that there were games that looked better than this coming out on PC in the late 90s. And if you really want the big nail in the coffin for this thing, Medal of Honor Allied Assault came out earlier in the same year. And that game is just light years ahead of this thing in terms of its visuals. The texture quality is very low res, and everything just ends up looking really muddy and blurry. And then the modeling and animation are only marginally better than what you would see on PS1. Now, I'm a bit willing to forgive that because this was the first game that they released on that particular generation of consoles and they hadn't quite figured everything out yet, but even back in its day, it really didn't look very good. And it's only gotten worse and worse looking over time. Similarly, you'll see some sound reuse between this and Medal of Honor Allied Assault. Now, you keep in mind that Allied Assault came first, and then this came out a few months later, so it's not really that big of a deal because they were on two different platforms, obviously. Allied Assault was on PC, whereas this was on console only. But you'll find that that actually becomes a bigger problem as you go through the rest of the series, because they just kept reusing sound effects over and over and over again throughout the entire series, and eventually they just all start to bleed together. In a lot of cases, the guns barely even sound like guns, and even worse than that, they just don't have enough oomph to them. They are not beefy sound effects. Nor are the explosion sounds. It ends up being rather disappointing in the long run. Speaking of disappointing, this thing has the same kind of soundtrack that all of the other Medal of Honor World War II games have, which means that it was done by Michael Giacchino and it sounds like it was trying to be ripped from Saving Private Ryan. Now, of course, at the time it wasn't completely overplayed, although it was starting to get rather stale. By today's standards, though, I challenge you to play music from Medal of Honor Frontline against any other Medal of Honor World War II game and try to tell the difference. Hell, you could even compare it to music from the World War II Call of Duties. I guarantee you, you would not be able to tell the difference unless somebody specifically told you, hey, this is from Medal of Honor Frontline. Now, don't get me wrong, the music itself is not bad, it's well composed and it's well performed, it's just that at the time it was released, that was getting to be a bit stale, and by modern standards, it's just ubiquitous and, frankly, extremely annoying. But you know what? At least the voice acting is decent. It's not amazing, but it's decent, which is more than you can say for most games back in that time. Terrible voice acting was pretty much a plague until the mid-2000s, so kudos to them for at least getting a decent enough voice cast to carry this thing along. But it's really not the presentation that's ultimately the issue here. The real issue is the story and the gameplay. And the story in this opens with, okay, it's a World War II game circa 2002. What do you think it opens with? It opens with the Omaha beach landing, of course. Because, of course, we're still riding that whole, hey, we can actually render this in 3D now, as well as, well, we're still riding the coattails of Saving Private Ryan. So we gotta open up with some big spectacular opening on Omaha Beach. But I digress. You play as Jimmy Patterson, who is an American soldier who is sent in to Omaha Beach first and then is co-opted for use with OSS operations. What does that mean in practical terms? Well, it means that you get to be the undeniable badass upon whom the entire course of the war hinges. Because that's what Medal of Honor is. It's not about presenting World War II in any sort of really accurate sense. It's about making you feel like a total badass and using World War II as a set piece. That's not to say that the game can't be good. That is to say, however, that the story is absolutely pathetic. Now, I don't want to spoil the plot too much, but it basically consists of someone telling you that you need to go do something, and then you just go do it. It's not about moments of selfless heroism, it's not about moments of camaraderie, it's about basically being James Bond. I mean, hell, there's even a particular point in the game where you have to go around in disguise, and you're given a suppressed pistol as well as ID papers, and your whole thing there is to infiltrate the area, much like a secret agent would. So, you know, it's basically Medal of Honor and Medal of Honor Allied Assaults all over again. As you progress through the game, you can pretty much see the exact points where they're like, well, we gotta have this in the game, let's add it to the list. Oh, there we go, check. And it ends up coming across as very, very lazy as a result. But ultimately, that's not the real problem with Medal of Honor Frontline. The real problem is the gameplay, which is a mess. You start out a level with a certain set of weapons, and then as you progress through the level, you might get access to a few more weapons, but as you continue, you're not able to switch them. You're only able to pick up ammunition for them. So let's say, for example, you pick up a BAR, and you really, really do not like the BAR and would much rather have an STG-44. Too bad, you're stuck with the bar the entire level. Admittedly, that's something that's just mildly irritating, but you can kind of get past that. What's harder to get past is the actual weapon handling. Most of the weapons in the game do enough damage to drop an enemy in basically 2 to 3 hits, no matter what it is you're using. In other words, a pistol will basically do the same amount of damage as a rifle would, which is absurd. The only major difference is that you can actually hit targets at longer ranges with the rifle, whereas with the pistol you just can't. There's supposed to be some degree of location-based damage, but I've actually tested it, and you do pretty much the same damage no matter where you hit them. Sometimes that means they'll go down in a single shot. Sometimes it means they'll go down in 2 to 3 shots. It just depends entirely on your luck. About the only thing that is absolutely guaranteed is that if you get a headshot, then they'll go down instantly. The problem with that is that the aiming is imprecise and sluggish enough that you're probably not going to get all that many headshots. As if the game would let you do that, given how incredibly terrible its frame rate is. The frame rate is never good, but sometimes at least it's consistent. And even a consistent 30 frames a second is preferable to the frame rate fluctuating wildly between single digits and going back up to 30. And I'm really not joking. What you are seeing is footage recorded directly from my GameCube. There is no emulation or anything of the sort going on here. It runs like crap. Particularly when there's a lot of particle effects on screen, the frame rate will absolutely tank. And it makes the crappy gunplay even crappier because now you can't even really react to anything just because the frame rate is so low. And as if it's the icing on the gunplay cake, the shotgun in this is one of the weakest shotguns I have ever seen in a first-person shooter. The spread is so incredibly wide that you're lucky to even hit anything at all, and even if you do hit something, it's still going to take you several shots to bring an enemy down. It's almost like EA Los Angeles has absolutely no idea how a shotgun works, which given that they're in California, I wouldn't be surprised by that. But it's to the point where you practically have to shove the shotgun down an enemy's throat in order to be able to get an instant kill with it. It is really depressing. I guess it's a good thing then that the AI is so incredibly brain dead that they will basically just stand in one place and let you shoot them to bits. And they're not even good shots. I have stood within a meter of enemies before and they have still missed. And I don't mean, oh, well, they missed one shot and then hit me with a second. No, I mean they shot at me about 5 or 6 times before they finally hit me once. Now theoretically, as you go further into the game is supposed to get harder, but it never really does. The enemies do more damage to you when they hit you, but they never really get more accurate. And they certainly don't get any smarter. But DW, I hear you saying, it was a game from 2002, no game had good AI back then. That's actually not entirely true. I'm pretty sure Quake 2 actually had better AI than this, and the AI in that was pretty brain dead too. But hey, at least certain enemies would duck when you started shooting at them. And that's to say nothing of the AI in the likes of, say, Turok 2, which actually had surprisingly good AI for the late 90s, early 2000s. Now you may be wondering, hey DW, why are you complaining so much about the AI? Well, it means that the game poses absolutely no challenge to you whatsoever. Health recovery items are absolutely plentiful, so there's never really any danger of actually dying very much in this game. Even the so-called stealth sections are a complete joke because the stealth system is pretty broken. And by that I mean practically non-existent, because about the only thing that counts as stealth in this game is the disguise level and the fact that there's a suppressed pistol in the game. And the suppressed pistol doesn't really do much. Because a lot of the times you're going to have to use the suppressed pistol, there's more than one enemy in a particular location, so they'll spot you, they'll raise the alarm, and then you've got a gunfight on your hands. And the thing is, because the weapon handling is so poor, it just makes the gunfights a complete chore rather than anything that's actually entertaining. And considering that that's pretty much your only real interactions with the game other than go to location and maybe press the action button, that ends up getting extremely boring extremely quickly. Because it's not like the level design makes up for anything either. It is extremely linear to a fault. Often with literal walls and fences that will keep you from going anywhere that they don't want you to go. Despite occasionally having the appearance of open areas, this is really just a corridor shooter. The objectives really are not as varied as you would think they might be, and the gameplay itself is extremely repetitive throughout the entire course of the game. Apart from basically the one stealth section in the game that you have to go through, there's basically nothing in this thing that will give you a reprieve from the incredibly crappy gunplay. Even the turret segments where you're manning a machine gun aren't enough to do that, because not only is the game running like garbage, it's also still got the crappy gunplay even with those machine guns. So even with those, you're still dealing with clumsy controls, with the horrendously inconsistent damage modeling, and my personal favorite with the turrets, you don't get a crosshair. Which can be something of a pain because often it can be actually kind of hard to see where the tracers are going. So the single player just completely craps out on itself, and that only leaves the multiplayer, which they're very proud of, I might add. On the front of the box, it specifically says, all-out multiplayer warfare, and when you turn the box over, it is the first thing they describe as far as the gameplay mechanics go. So obviously they're very proud of their multiplayer. Problem with that being that it is 4-player split screen, it runs like complete garbage, and it plays almost exactly the same as the single player. It's just that it's janky enough that your friends might have a laugh while playing it. Beyond a game occasionally being janky enough to where you can laugh at it, there's really nothing that redeems it. Even in its day, it was extremely derivative of other titles as far as set pieces and as far as general styling goes. And there's absolutely nothing that can reconcile the incredibly crappy gunplay, which for a first-person shooter is the kiss of death. And when you slap on the awful AI as well as the extremely basic multiplayer, all you have here is a piece of crap. For the life of me, I cannot figure out why people seem to think so highly of Medal of Honor Frontline. It has always been a linear, extremely clunky, extremely derivative first-person shooter that just fails utterly at being a first-person shooter. There are certainly worse games out there, but as far as the Medal of Honor series goes, this is not one of the better ones. In fact, it's one of the worst ones. I give it a 1 out of 5. Thanks for watching.